exciting topic today. Welcome to everyone. And again, we are super excited to have a fabulous panel with us today. This event is organized by the Nonprofit Board Committee of the club. And that committee consists of a very dedicated, fun group of women who help with the work that we do on the committee. And that work is mainly supporting nonprofits by placing brilliant women on boards of nonprofits to facilitate that contact and find the right match on a nonprofit board. And then we also offer a variety of educational events regarding nonprofit board service with various topics. So this year, for example, and Rita Advani is here on the call, who's chair of the events subcommittee of our bigger committee. We have launched a 4-part series of board education events. We have already had 2 of them. The first one was really about the basic information about what is it like to be a board member? What do you need to know? What should you think about before you join a board? And then we had our second event, which really focused in on a deep level regarding the finances and sustainability of a nonprofit, as well as the board's responsibility with strategic planning. So we had another fabulous panel talking about that. And today we're very excited to have this event, which Partnering for Success. When we thought about this topic, I would say it's one of the most critical things for a functioning, effective, high-performing nonprofit. And that is to really understand those different roles of governance, of being a board member, volunteering, while also understanding what is the difference with the management of the organization for the executive director and the staff, and knowing that sometimes if that's not clear and that doesn't work, a lot of things can fall apart. So we're super excited. I want to thank especially Patricia Mullin and Susan Maselli from our committee who have worked really hard to find these wonderful panelists that we have today. We will get started. I just want to say we all stay muted while the panel has their conversation. Feel free, however, at any time to use the chat room to run any questions you have. Any questions, keep them coming in the chat room, and we'll make sure to try to cover all of those as we continue the conversation. We'll monitor those. Okay, so with that, I would like to hand over to Patricia Mullin to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Åsa. And of course, what's standing between us and the Red Sox game? A very exciting session that we've put together with a lot of our business partners here too. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their busy day. And we promise, Jim Clocky has promised to make sure that we're going to get out of here in time for the opening pitch. So thank you, Jim. I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for today's session, Jim Clocky. I've known Jim both personally and professionally for many years too, and I'm sure you're going to find the discussions very engaging. Jim is currently CEO of the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network. He focuses on public policy, advocacy, programming, and services for approximately 800 members that are predominantly nonprofits in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Prior to the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network, Jim was the Executive VP of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. He has his undergraduate from University of Notre Dame. Got to give a shout out to that, go Irish. And then also a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government. I'm going to turn it over now to Suzanne Maselli to introduce the other panelists. Suzanne.
Thanks, Patsy. Actually, Jim is going to introduce the other panelists.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna
Okay,
send it to Jim.
Jim, go ahead.
Suzanne, Suzanne Patiesa, thanks very much. And thanks everybody at the Boston Club. We are delighted, we at MNN, to partner with the club. And we were talking, so before 5, one of the challenges of these virtual events is that, you're not in person, so it's not possible for everybody to go over and get a drink beforehand. If you want to walk into your kitchen, office, or home and get a glass of wine or a beer, feel free to do that. And like all of you, we long for the time when these events can be in person. We think that day is coming sooner and sooner, but this is a terrific event, a terrific panel today. The only observation I will make at the top is that this is the kind of topic, board staff relationships, how you help an organization function, how you really put it in the right position for the strongest, best possible success. There have been near infinite number of books written and articles published and blog posts on this, but nothing beats hearing about it firsthand from people who are in the trenches, who are doing the work, who have lived these experiences on one or both sides of the board staff relationship. And so that's what we have for you today. What we'll do, we'll ask each of our 3 panelists. Initially, I'll introduce them and then they'll talk for a little while about their own experiences and maybe share some of the nonprofit leadership experiences and lessons they have learned. We'll then open it up for Q&A. We've got a few questions to get the discussion started. And then, as was mentioned earlier, we encourage everybody to put your own questions in the chat box. We'll get through as many of them as we can. We want to have as robust a discussion as we can, and we will have we'll have the event wrapped up by 6:30. I think first pitch, Patsy, is 8 o'clock, right? So we should be we should be home free, no pun intended. We are first going to hear from Danella Clark. Danella is the president and CEO of the Boston Arts Academy Foundation. Pure coincidence that they are located and building a new building right next to Fenway Park. So Danella, in a year or two, when the building is done, you can host, and we'll all sneak a peek at Fenway Park from the Academy's new building. Danella comes to this with 25 years of terrific nonprofit leadership experience. I hope if you haven't had a chance, please, in the invitation for this event, read the bios of all 3 panelists. They are terrifically rich and diverse in experience, and it's one of the reasons why we're really delighted to be bringing them all together today. Right now at the Academy, she is leading the Academy's first ever campaign, Building Our Future, a $25 million campaign. No small lift, but an important goal, an important target for a really terrific institution. Danella is also, among other things, the chair of the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Danella to hear about her nonprofit experience and lessons learned so far.
Good evening, everyone. Jim, thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for joining us in this Zoom community. You know, I often say that life is a choice, and certainly you could have chosen to be anywhere at this moment, but we are delighted that you've chosen to spend some time with us. I am thrilled to be here sharing the Zoom stage with Charmaine and T. I look forward to hearing from them, and certainly want to thank Patsy for the invitation. And I see my board treasurer, David Felton, who really made the connection. I want to thank you, David, for your leadership, your service to Boston Arts Academy, and for joining us this evening. As Jim said, I am the proud CEO of Boston Arts Academy Foundation. I like to say we are the famed school of Boston. We are Boston's only public high school for the visual and performing arts. But really, let's get to my lesson learned. I've had a long career in nonprofits. I jokingly say to my for-profit friends that I don't know what a 401k is. I do, but all of my career, I've been focused on making sure I have a 403b. So my entire vocation has been in nonprofits, and I've been proud to lead a few organizations where our work has always been focused on advancing great missions like that of Boston Arts Academy. The biggest lesson I've learned, Jim, over the course of my career, particularly related to this topic, the role of the executive versus the board, is that, as someone mentioned earlier, to me, it's really about clarity and really about roles and responsibilities, and making sure that you have a blueprint to that. So when I joined Boston Arts Academy 5 years ago, I've just started my sixth fiscal year. One of the first things I did was created a board handbook, a board binder, and to really make sure that things were in that binder, such as bylaws, the fiduciary responsibilities of the board, making sure that the board members, the directors and the officers, as well as myself, had directors and officers insurance, and making sure that, for example, we had things around our give-get policies, and really wanting to make sure that the board understood what their responsibilities were versus what management and staff responsibilities are. I will say that for the most part has worked very well. Every now and again, we'll have a board member who may, as my kids would say, get out of pocket and not understand and start getting involved in the day-to-day operations. But that's where you have a very strong board chair who could go to that person and really say to them, let's refer you back to the board handbook. Let's refer you back to, it is not your job to get involved in the day-to-day operations of the organization. And I find that when there's clarity of roles, you have less problems, less confusion. I liken it to a household. I always say where there's no roles and responsibilities and clarity, that's where there's trouble. So for example, Charmaine, if you and I are living together and we've come to agreement that your job is to do the laundry and my job is to manage the trash, if I start mixing the whites with the coloreds and you start putting trash in the recycle bin, there's going to be a problem. And so every now and again, Jim, we're fortunate that we have a great pro bono counsel who will come in and look at our board documents and make sure our governing documents are in order. But that's the biggest lesson I've learned over my career, particularly again, relative to the executive and the board member, is that it's critical that there be clarity of roles and that both parties agree to those roles. I remember when I took the job that I'm in, there had been some turmoil. And when I came, you had board members coming in and meeting with the staff. And I'm like, no, we've got to reset this and make sure that everybody stays in their lane. And it served me well because I've sat on the other side. As you mentioned, Jim, I'm the chairwoman of the Mass Commission on Status of Women. And when I see other commissioners getting involved in the day-to-day operations of the commission, I'm like, nope, slow your roll. That is not our job. I'm also a trustee at Fontbonne Academy, where again, I've said to them, it's critical in order for the staff to do their work that we not get involved, particularly in the day-to-day operations. So again, biggest lesson learned is to make sure that there's a board handbook and a clear blueprint and a roadmap of what is the executive role versus the board's role. Thank you.
Danella, thank you. I was going to ask as a quick follow-up, having been on both sides of the equation, you've lived not only the different perspectives, but the value to each side of doing their own thing. Not only does it, if someone crosses over, not only does the person whose lane has been jumped into get upset, but in some ways it distracts the first person from fulfilling the role that they have, whether it's a staff role or a board role. And let me just to quick follow-up. You've been very clear with people, expectations, policies, and then the follow-up when it's needed. I think in some cases, one of the difficulties people run into is that when somebody kind of goes out of lane, it doesn't get addressed or it festers. And by addressing it right away, you nipped it in the bud. But talk about that for a minute, because some people might say, well, it's a minor transgression, I'll let it go. They're a board member. How can I challenge a board member? We'll just let it go. And then you bring yourself greater headaches down the road often.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if it's a small thing, Jim, I've been known, I've been in organizations where you let it go. But if there is a pattern, then that's where it becomes a problem. And I think when it's a pattern, that's the opportunity to either go to your chair of governance or to the chair of the board and sort of lay out and say, here are some examples of a board member who is a volunteer. And I always say, I get that some board members say, oh, this is a job, it's a job. It's like, no, you're volunteering, an important job because you're taking on to be a fiduciary. But I think when you see that there is a pattern of someone doing this, then it becomes a problem. Now, on the other side, because I've been a trustee, where if you don't have confidence in the executive, or you see that something is off kilter, or you're not getting the information that you need, whether or not it be about financials or not getting the information, then I think you have the right to challenge or question. But again, my advice would not be that the board member goes into the organization and starts talking to staff and getting all involved in the operations. Then I say the chair of the board or whomever then has to have a conversation with the executive and say, I'm concerned about X, Y, and Z, and how do we course correct that? Or is it time for the board to make a change? But it's not that the board goes in and takes over the organization. So I've been known to let it go if I see, it's just one thing here or there. But when I sense a pattern, then I escalate that and say, because it's not my job to have to, it's the chairman of the board or the chair of governance job to deal with that particular board member. But I find if there's a pattern, then it really can hurt the organization and becomes very disruptive.
It's a great perspective, actually applicable in other spaces too. Let's now bring Charmaine Higgins. Charmaine is the executive director of Trinity Boston Connects. She comes to us tonight with over 20 years of senior leadership experience in the nonprofit sector. Charmaine's also a senior fellow at the Institute for Nonprofit Practice. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm proud to say that she's a member of the M&M Board of Directors. Charmaine, it's all yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Jim. Can everybody hear me? Because you were sounding very scratchy, Jim. Can y'all hear me?
Okay.
Yes, thumbs up.
Yes, but Jim, you may want to check your miking because I had similar problems, Charmaine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So I join with Danella and T in saying thank you to the Boston Club for the invitation to be with you all. I totally echo everything that Danella has said in terms of clarity of roles, etc. I'll start by sharing a little bit about myself. That first, I'm a proud graduate of the Boston Public School System and have been in the nonprofit sector for about 20 years in jobs from working at the Boston Private Industry Council. And I always give Neil Sullivan, who is still the executive director, praise for hiring me and starting me on my nonprofit career. I've been at the American Heart Association, most recently, before coming to Trinity Boston Connects, I was at a fabulous organization called Strive Boston Employment Service in Codman Square. And now I serve as the executive director here at Trinity Boston Connects, and I'm just so pleased to be with all of you. I think the other thing that I would add to everything that Danella has said is that I feel that executive directors really have to start being more courageous in their direct communication with board members. I think overall, and I tend to be very blunt, so if I offend anyone, I'm so sorry, but who has time for pleasantries? Like there's too much work to be done. We just got to get straight to it. So, I think overall, executive directors, we have to sort of develop tougher skin in terms of our ability to push back on board members, particularly those board members who are also major donors to our organizations. I think there's a tendency to not want to rock the boat, not want to jeopardize funding. But if you have a board member, be it a board chair or just a member who is gone rogue, and by that I mean is just all in the mix of the nonprofit organization and its day-to-day operations and the management of the organization, then the first person to really address that should be the executive director. And so I would add to Danella's list of clarity of roles. We have a statement of expectations of our board members, bylaws, et cetera, et cetera. There has to, I believe, an executive director has to develop a certain level of courage and tough-mindedness to really be a straight shooter and say, okay, this is not acceptable what you're doing. Calling staff, asking them various questions. And when I tell you, I probably have the best worst case scenarios to share with you all about what a board member should not do. And I'm happy to share all of that. And so, yes, ditto on everything Danella has said. And as leaders of nonprofit organizations, we have to be clear, we have to be courageous, and we have to push back when the need arises. Back to you, Jim.
Charmaine, thank you. First things first, can people hear me better now? Good,
Yes,
terrific.
much better.
Charmaine, you can't say something like that without expecting the immediate follow-up question. Share your best worst case scenario story.
So there's so many, but I'll start with one. So the first thing that boards should not do, in my humble opinion, is I've seen this typically when the organization is flush with cash, board members and the board as a whole will say, you know, executive director, you are a godsend. You are fabulous. We love you. And then inevitably, when funding constricts, when there's the decrease in funding, all of a sudden, you know, board members will say, executive director, you suck. We can't imagine why we ever hired you. You are awful, 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 awful. So one day in 2008, when I became the executive director at Strive, now listen to who this person was. He was the founder of all the Strives across the country. He was the organization's largest donor. And what else about him? Yeah, I think he was the vice chair or something like that. So money was tight. We had some funding, planned for some funding that didn't come through. And he came to my office one day and he said, Charmaine, you know what? I think that you shouldn't be the executive director of this organization anymore. We're losing funding and I'm just not pleased with your your leadership and your leadership style. And it's always good to take a breath, like to inhale deeply and exhale before you respond to a comment like that. And so I inhaled deeply and exhaled. And I said, let's say his name is David. It's not. I said, David, while I appreciate your opinion about my leadership style and where the organization is financially, you are one person on this board. And what we need to do right now is go back to the full board and you can present your case to the full board. And if it is the full board's will and desire to remove me from this role as the executive director, then the full board, I will respect the full board's decision. So, you know, translate that to, you're just one person on this board. I'm not listening to you. If the whole board wants to fire me, fine, but you are not, I'm not going to allow you to frighten me out of my job and out of a role that is so important to me and so important to this community. So that's one of many.
If this was a live event, the room would be full of applause right now. That's great. That's great. T, T gets to follow on Charmaine's story, but let me just say, T comes to us today with extensive experience in nonprofit and corporate board leadership positions. She has exercised leadership roles in a number of boards, including senior governance roles and leading the effort for constructive change in nonprofits. T spent over 20 years at Wellington Management and is also a Boston Club member. So T, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thank you all. I think a kind of a capsule summary for your references. In the course of graduate school, and I was in urban studies and planning, I got very interested in working part-time in the state legislature and finished my graduate degrees while I was actually working in executive branches as a consumer advocate, activist, banking regulator. And it was only after the first decade of employment in the public sector that I migrated to investment management. What I learned in the first 10 years is no money, no mission. And even in public financial crises, the state went through a debt crisis in the mid-1970s. My family sometimes says I'm like a moth to flames. Where there's financial trouble, T is diving in, and that's colored a lot of my career, both in the private sector and in the public sector. I've served for over 15 years now on several New York Stock Exchange companies, both as a rank and file board member and chairing various committees, audit, comp, governance. And I would say in many ways, and it's sort of the core focus of our discussion today, is governance in some ways is the most challenging, because as much as you try and codify it, ultimately situations arise where you haven't and couldn't have possibly thought through all the implications. So while I fully agree with all that both Danella and Charmaine have said, what I found is, as a board member in nonprofits for now over 25 years, is there are two kinds of situations where the board, often led by the board chair or a committee chair, needs to step in. And one array of circumstances, lots of working examples, is when the organization is in financial trouble. And it applies in the private sector as well as the nonprofit sector. And if the chief executive and the finance team aren't equipped to figure out a survival strategy and navigating strategy, oftentimes it's the board members that need to get tapped on a very interim basis to roll up their shirt sleeves and dig in. And I would say the recent experience with COVID has relived this. I'm on the board of one organization that, when COVID shut things down overnight, lost over 80% of their revenue, their top line. There was no way they could meet payroll in the coming months. And in that situation, the finance committee of the board met weekly, every Monday morning at 8:30. To figure out and help management figure out how to bail out, how to get a much needed line of credit from a major lending institution. We were in survival mode. I would say, in addition to the financial crisis, is when you have a crisis in management, and one that I lived through very recently, is when the chief executive was very suddenly diagnosed with a terminal illness and really needed to resign fairly immediately. The best thing I can offer for that sort of situation is you need to stay flexible, but you should have a contingency plan in the event that situation arises. And it could be not just the chief executive, it could be a member of it could be the CFO or a comparably important position, that you have an interim succession plan. You try and put things together in a way that it doesn't wire the job to any particular staff member, but the board members need to play an above average role. The way I'll wrap up, Jim, is there's a saying sometimes that the role of a board member is nose in and fingers out. And we can all give a spectrum of experiences around how you navigate that.
T, that's great. Thank you. In the prep call last week for this session, Charmaine and Danella had great phrases or slogans, which I want to make sure we get to at some point in this. But that is a great way to start us off. T, let me just ask, so given your experience, is the perceived assumed differences between nonprofit and for-profit boards and organizations, how much of a difference is there? Not that it's the same in every case, but people frequently assume there are great and vast and often irreconcilable differences. What's your sense?
I think there are some clear differences, and part of it is the configuration of the stakeholders. In many ways, in the publicly traded corporate world, the accountability is pretty clear. It has been broadened in recent years as some of the corporate leadership has said our priorities need not be just our shareholders, but our employees, the broader community, and so forth. But there's a clear necessary emphasis on serving the shareholders by growing the company and growing the returns on investment. In the nonprofit, in many ways, the mission, the goals, the objectives, and success can often be more difficult to measure. In many ways, you could say the nonprofit board is, and the role of management is even more challenging. But the last thing that I'll say that I think is important is, for many years I've served on the corporate board committee of the Boston Club. And one of the things that we repeatedly have advised those interested in corporate boards is there's no better way to prove that you can serve as an effective director than serving on a nonprofit board. And there's a lot of good experience you can garner early on in your career by doing that. You won't be eligible, if you're ever even interested, for a for-profit board until, most likely, not always, you've retired from your day job. The potential for conflicts and so forth means that very, very few full-time working individuals actually serve as directors on corporate boards. That's it.
Thank you. Let's start into questions, and we have a few questions here. We'll just put these to the panelists and ask you each to respond to them in turn. The first question, what for you are the most important 2 or 3 elements or characteristics in a board member? Danella.
Oh boy, there are so many, but for me, the first and foremost really is that board member believes in the mission, whatever that mission is. And I'm in an organization where our mission is serving a predominantly diverse population. So it's really important to me that people believe in the mission, and that mission for me is our students. So I don't want somebody who sort of has what we call in philanthropy the savior mentality, that they're just coming in from the suburbs to say, oh, we're going to help these little poor kids of color. I want people who really believe in our kids. I remember when I came to Boston Arts Academy, I said, oh, I want to have $1 million black tie event on a Saturday night. And a member of the board said, oh, do you? And I said, oh, and I think their largest sponsorship level is $5,000, and I wanted to move it to $100,000. And this person said, we're just an inner city school supporting urban kids. Do you really think anyone's going to come out on a Saturday night for this type of school? And I was like, in my head, I'll never forget it. I was like, this person doesn't belong here, and successfully moved that person out, because so for me, the number one thing is you must believe in the mission, and not just the mission statement, but the people that we serve. The other thing I think is really important, particularly when you're thinking about philanthropy and fiduciary, is I also don't want a board member that's on 5 or 6 boards. I kind of say, as I'm talking to people, I really want to make sure that we are one of your top 3 philanthropic priorities, because I just don't think that people can have all of this focus everywhere. So I would say mission, philanthropic, one of their top 3 philanthropic priorities. And again, I just really think it comes down to the belief in somebody that's also going to be here for the work, right? Not just to put their name on a piece of paper, but is actually going to show up, get on a committee, do the work, and be there. So those would be my top.
Thank you. Those are great. And Charmaine and T, no obligation to have different responses. If you want to endorse any of the prior traits, please do. Charmaine.
I would yet again echo what Danella has said. And I'd also add that the board member needs to understand the culture of the organization. So I just followed, I'm the new executive director at Trinity after the founding executive director resigned, retired, actually, not resigned, but retired. And when she was the executive director, it was largely a white-led, white-staffed organization, and the board was very much a white board, very few people of color. And since I've come, and they, even in that state, however, they did make a conscientious effort to change and to grow and to develop and to have both a staff and a board that really reflected the diversity of the city of Boston. And so hence, you know, I came in and we have been moving fairly quickly into a POC-led, majority POC staffed organization. And now our board is also reflecting that same makeup. And so we just had a board retreat this past Saturday, and one of the staff said, like, we would never do this or want to come to this space before, because the nature of the board and how they related to the staff, it just wasn't a happy, don't y'all tell this to anybody, but it didn't feel like a really happy place to be in terms of the board. And so to have people who are just kind-hearted too, like good people who know how to play well in the sandbox is so important. And understanding the culture and where the organization is going. And I can't say enough about just time, you know, making the time commitment to show up to full board meetings, to show up to committee meetings, and to really demonstrate their level of investment by their time. That's what I'd add.
That's great. Thank you. T.
Yeah, terrific comments by both Danella and Charmaine. I guess the things I might add are, I know it's an overused word in many ways today, but diversity, really trying to develop a skills experience matrix, figure out where the holes are on the board, who's not there, what voices aren't represented that really should be, because in my experience, that tends to lead to the most robust discussions and decision-making. And one of the most challenging things in any nonprofit situation is what I'll call large donor dominance. And that doesn't necessarily lead to the best outcomes. Many of the nonprofits I've been involved in have created what I'll call kind of a wedding cake. In other words, there's a board that has the fiduciary responsibility, but often it's more commonly adopted now that you have terms, 2 or 3 year terms renewed, a max of X, and then you need to rotate off for a year. The common problem that many organizations have is thinking, well, we can't ask large donor X to step down, we create the second layer of the wedding cake around an advisory committee that doesn't have decision-making responsibility, but keeps them in tow. There are all kinds of ways to retain your donors. The last thing I'd say is one of the most important things in my experience is having a director who's willing to engage openly. And one of my board colleagues often used to say, cards on the table, face up. Say what you think, say it in a way that's constructive, that you understand that others may not agree, but holding back and having sidebar conversations after the meeting doesn't move the organization forward.
It's a very good point. And cards on the table, face up, where we're going to have a collection of aphorisms after this meeting to share with everybody. Let me jump back for a minute to the question of culture, because this is such an important question, and it also in some ways ties to one of the other things we wanted to be sure we covered today. Relationships between the staff and the board. What would each of you advise as to the best way to start, cultivate, strengthen those relationships, and also through the lens of the culture of the organization? A new board member comes in, knows often not much about the culture of an organization, and in that learning process, their conversations with staff or other board members, formal or informal, are going to be a really big part of setting their understanding of culture, let alone shaping and growing the culture over time. Who would like to jump in first?
I'll take a grab at that. One of the things most of my organizations have found very helpful is what I'll call an orientation for a new director. And it doesn't need to consume much of any single staff person's time, but we usually orchestrate it so that in half day, maybe a little more, depending on the size of the organization, they have a brief amount of time with each of the key senior members of the team, and then usually wrap up in a final heart-to-heart with the chief executive, what they learned, what their observations and questions are, trying to accelerate the onboarding so that they don't learn it piecemeal at board meetings. It can be a way to really get them well-grounded.
Thank you. We also, in the age of virtual workplaces and hybrid workplaces and Zoom everything, this process of socialization and acquaintance has not become any easier. We know your organizations, every organization is grappling with remote hybrid challenges, and now all the challenges around reopening, vaccination being one example of a set of difficult questions around reopening and hybrid models. In each of your experiences, what's the right role for the board vis-a-vis the executive director and the staff as we all grapple with these reopening, policy, hybrid workplace questions?
I'll take that, and then I'll stop talking. I think what has been helpful for me is that first, having these conversations with the entire staff and getting a sense of, what their concerns are. We have 5 different programs in 3 different pathways. We have some staff who are physically located at a middle school, others that have relationships with different schools because through our running program. So we coined this phrase, a differentiated hybrid model, because even within the hybrid model, there are differences based on each program. And so what then we did is to then bring these concerns and also opportunities to a board meeting, where what was most helpful is just the board helping to frame the problem, not just for the current, right now where we are, but also like looking around the corner, looking 3 months, 6 months down the line, like what are issues that we should be thinking about now in preparation for, down the road. So having board members and the executive committee of the board do some problem framing, do some scenario planning as well. So, if such and such were to happen, what do we do? And how do we address the issue? So those two things, the scenario planning, the problem framing, have been really, really important as we've been in this sort of Hollywood Squares existence right now.
So
Danella, what's your sense?
where I involve the board is where their responsibilities are. So fiduciary, ironically, we have our board treasurer on the call. And as we all know, those of us in school land, this is our third year of COVID. So like many organizations, I reopened in May, but then when the mayor I reopened, and I remember last fiscal year, where July to June, we set one budget. And then we had to reforecast the budget in October of last year when we realized we weren't going to be able to have our big event in person. And so then this year we thought we were coming out of COVID. So when our fiscal year started in July, everyone was back to work. We set this very ambitious revenue goal for this fiscal year, but then the Delta variant came. We saw that things were not coming out as we needed to. So what I've sort of done around staffing, right, is I go back to my board chair in particular, and I say, look, I keep my board informed as things are happening. We're like a family, so they know that one person on my team actually lost multiple family members to COVID. They know another person on my team actually had COVID. So when I send a note and say, look, the public health and safety of my staff is my top priority, I want to switch back to hybrid, I get no pushback from Jeff Rosica. It's like, got it, Danella, because he's running a publicly traded company where they're hybrid. And then the next thing I have to do is I work with the treasurer of my board and the finance committee, and I say, okay, if I'm looking out, we're still in COVID, and I'm still worried that if we can't, it's very hard to ask for people to say no to you face to face. But I'm like, okay, we have a problem. This is still happening, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to raise the revenue I thought we were. And so that's where I work with the board. We've just ran it through finance committee, have the treasurer's support. And now this week, we actually have our full board meeting where he's all teed up and prepped, and he's ready to make the case to get the board to vote the budget, so that we don't have the scenarios that Charmaine mentioned earlier, where the board is not understanding that, no, it's not Danella's fault that COVID continues to rage on. It's just COVID, and we'll be able to do what we can. And I have to tell you, I was so surprised that we had reforecast our revenue numbers last year, took it down $500,000, but we were very successful and far over raised our budget in COVID, because we pivoted and figured out. And so even though I'll go in and I'll say, look, I want to reforecast the budget because COVID rages on, I'll also walk in there and say, look, I did it last year, and look how wildly successful we are. But I like to under-promise and over-deliver. So that's where I involve the board, in particular with COVID. They don't really get in my way if I say we're working hybrid or we're going to work remote, as long as the work gets done. But there are key places you need them, because if you're not able, right, Charmaine, to do all the classes or have your big events, you're not going to hit the revenue in the way you would in a normal way. And I'd rather get the upfront change and approval versus waiting to the end of the fiscal year and saying, oh, we missed the number because of COVID. So that's where I really partner with them and run it through committee, and then now we'll take it to the full board. And I have 100% confidence that they understand that we'll get the votes that we need.
Yeah, Jim, great comments by both Danella and Charmaine. The only thing I would add is this has been the emotional toll on senior management of navigating this has been tremendous. And I don't need to tell any of you all that, but one of the big roles for the board of the various organizations I've been involved with and through this period has been to be a source as a sounding board of support. There are some tough decisions, and the picture and some of the organizations I'm involved in are quite large, of thousands of employees. And the match between who wants to work from home, how much, who wants back in the office. They may have a home situation where working from home is almost impossible. They may have a childcare situation where getting to the office or doing any time traveling is impossible. So the checkerboard is really difficult. And one organization where, for a combination of reasons, in the interface with the public, the chief executive decided he really needed to implement a vaccine mandate. And this was before Baker and so forth. And we were very, very concerned about the shakeout. This is an organization that has a number of employees who are in COVID denial. And how much we might find that we were dealing with resignations. And even in a large, very progressive organization, there was one member of senior management who, not for religious, not for healthcare reasons, for ideological reasons, was opposed to getting vaccinated or tested. And we had to help back the chief executive that to stand ground and make the tough decision. But serving as a sounding board, and as both Danella and Charmaine have said, don't make the decision for management, but help them think through this. This is one of the toughest times, and especially in organizations where you don't have a head of HR and the chief executive is HR, your job's just got harder.
That's great advice. I like you, have had experience on both sides of the board staff line, and I think that's a terrific way to frame it. We are going to go to questions that you've all been putting forward for panelists through the chat, and Suzanne has one of those.
Sure. So this is a question from Rita at Vani, and it's related to the conversation we've just been having. Specifically, can you think of any instances where board members or trustees need to have a line of communications or a talk with the staff or others in the C-suite? And Rita, if you want to elaborate on that question, please feel free.
So thank you. So my almost day job is being chair of a healthcare delivery organization. And one of the things that I find that I need to do sometimes is actually have conversations with members of the staff, as well as, members of the C-suite from time to time. And, to be able to kind of get a sense of how, for instance, the CEO is performing, the executive director and so on. So I was wondering if there were any other instances where you feel that is important.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Many of my organizations do performance evaluations. One of the board's most important functions is hiring and helping to develop the chief executive. And so we do 360s in a number of organizations, and that's one example. I would say in the ordinary course of business as a committee chair, I usually have pretty regular interface, well known to the chief executive, with the key staff member or members supporting that committee. For example, chairing audit, finance, active contact with the CFO, if there's a treasurer, that sort of thing. Similarly, when I've chaired nominating and governance, my contact there has usually been with both the chief executive and Often the staff support comes from either an in-house general counsel or an outside pro bono law firm about best practice and so forth. So I think the most important thing, bottom line, is that I can't think of a situation, even if the conversations you're having with the staff are confidential, the chief executive needs to know, not what the conversation was, but and part of this is just resource management. Board members can consume unwittingly a lot of a staff person's time, and it's the chief executive's responsibility to make sure that things stay manageable. Thank you.
I would agree with T, but I cautioned it, and I agree with T that, you know, if it's our treasurer's on the call, or chair of finance or chair of audit needs to talk to my CFO, or if the marketing chair needs to talk to the staff person that's staffing marketing, or a board member needs to talk to the board clerk. But I really believe in a chain of command, and I do get a little concerned if board members are talking to all members of the staff, particularly if it's not evaluation time. It just gets unwieldy and sometimes could even be uncomfortable for the staff person, because then they're wondering, why is X board member reaching out to them? I believe, I for one really believe in the chain of command. On my board, which operates very much like a business, the board goes into executive session. So if there's a concern about me or my leadership, they're able to talk about that privately. But then my expectation, which it always happens, is that the board chair within 24 hours gets back in touch with me and provides that feedback in terms of what went on in executive session. And we have such a partnership. My former board chair, who was phenomenal, Lee Pelton, and now I have a new board chair who I think has gone to great pains to make sure that I understand that he has my back, because Lee and I had such a solid relationship. So whenever anything comes up, in fact, something came up today, he will stop in the middle of the day and text me and say, Danella, blah, 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 blah. So I get very concerned if I have a board member that's kind of just working through my staff. And my staff is very good to say, Danella, ex-board member is calling, what is this about? And if someone, again, goes out of lane or out of pocket, I am quick to tell them, you're stepping outside of the scope, because you just don't, you don't need that. And I find some board members, not all, but some can be busybodies and just trying to run around the organization and, quite frankly, see who they can pick off. That's something that I've seen over the course of my career. So I just think we have to be careful with how much engagement if it's not appropriate.
I would absolutely second that, because that dynamic also creates a sense of a question of loyalty. So you have your staff person saying, oh my gosh, this is my boss's boss, the executive director's boss. And so if they're contacting me, the anxiety level immediately goes up. I do think that there has to be a lot of clarity, particularly from the board chair, to say, in a board meeting, and in our board meetings, we have all of our leadership team there, so all of the program directors, to say, you know, I will be contacting each of you because this is, you know, the time that we're going to be doing a performance evaluation on Charmaine, and you know, these are the questions that I'll ask. But it's a tricky dance, and I would more often than not err on the side of being cautious and conservative, where it's like, okay, if you have a concern, please talk to me. I will bring in, you know, the particular staff person so that we can have a three-way conversation. But it's you know, when you have these rogue board members who just want to get in there and wreak havoc, sometimes unintentionally too, but it can happen.
I see lots of nodding in agreement. Let me throw out one other question, which I know we have others from the audience, which we will be able to get to, but this is a little bit of shifting gears, given the interest everybody has in this topic. Danella, Charmaine, T, guidance or suggestions for people who are looking to join a nonprofit board, whether it be their first board or whether they are already on one or two and either want to or have the opportunity to join another one.
I would just say, again, it goes back to what I said before, make sure the missions are aligned. And, you know when people ask me, and I probably, like all of us on this Zoom, get asked all the time to join a board. The first thing I ask the person is, what are the roles and responsibility? What is the commitment? How many board meetings? What's the give, get, or right raise, however you want to term it, particularly for a nonprofit board? What is the commitment? Because none of us here, time is paramount, and you don't want to plan to just say yes to get on a board. So you have to make sure the mission are aligned with your core values. I have a couple of my colleagues on, and they know one of the things is I'm not a pet person. I'm not a dog or animal person. So you would never find me either working for the Animal Rescue League or on that board, because it's just not something that I'm passionate about. In fact, I went to call on a donor once, Jim, for a 7-figure gift. And man, it was all I could take. She had these huge dogs running all around. Fortunately, I had another colleague with me and said, Danella really is afraid of dogs, so she put the dog away. But yeah, just make sure that it's a mission that you believe in, and two, that you'll have the time to do it.
Danella, what was the outcome of the pitch?
Oh, I got the money. I got the money, and she put the dogs away, and she understood. I'm probably rare, but she understood that I'm just not a dog person.
Those are terrific comments. And I think the two things I might add are, what's most important, your reputation as a board member is going to follow you, and be prepared to under promise and over deliver, because it will carry throughout things you may want to do in the future. And I think sitting back before you seek to join either your first nonprofit board or another one is really reflect on what kinds of organizations and agendas and missions really are most important to you, because as both Danella and Charmaine have said, you really need to pare down to your essence of what you really want to prioritize, and not get stretched too thin. So the last thing I would say is, there's a significant difference, which I think we've highlighted in various ways, about the differences between a board member and a staff member. And many times when you're looking for your first board, or you've served on a very small board where there was a lot of almost quasi-staff responsibility, you really need to think through what you offer to a board, not what you offer as a potential staff person. It's a very different process, and I think it can really help you frame whether or not going after a board position is really right for you. Do you want to play the governing role as opposed to the doer role?
And one thing that I would...
Oh, go ahead, Charmaine, and then I just want to jump in and answer a question I saw in the chat. Go ahead.
Okay. The one thing that I would add as a follow-up to T's suggestion and Danella's suggestion is also volunteer. If there's a discrete event, a road race, a gala, like go and talk to people, talk to the staff, talk to other board members, talk to a funder and say, why do you give to this organization? Why do you like working for this organization? Why do you like serving on this board? To really get a sense of like, what is this organization? I see it from one perspective, but to really get in and ask those questions of like, why do you do this work? that will also give you a really good sense of if you want to be a part of it in terms of its governance.
Danella.
So I just wanted to shout out Sonia Allen, who is on our Boston Arts Academy School Board of Trustees, who's here. And she had a great question in the chat around board engagement. And her question was something along the lines of, what do you do when the board member comes in, and whether or not it's the board chair, or I would also say the executive is not engaging that person, they lose momentum. I don't know, Sonia, if you want to jump in here and make sure I'm framing your question correctly.
No, you are. That's right. I just see that boards, sometimes they have ideas of grandeur and they invite board members based on their specificity. And then once they arrive, there isn't any engagement. There's no work for them to do. And they come to every meeting and they're talked at, and there's no action. And some board members, like more the ones, that I serve, would like to be involved in the organization. I think organizations lose good board members because of inaction. And so I just wanted to raise that, because I think it's something that happens very often.
I really appreciate that. It's funny, when I joined an organization, I said to the staff, I don't want to be decked, meaning I don't want to be talked at. So what we do is we really work to make sure that our committee chairs are ready to go, that they're leading those conversations. But with regard to board engagement, for those of you here, is we have what I have termed a board action plan. So every year, annual plan, every year at the start of the fiscal year, I sit down with each member of my board. I go through the board action plan where we understand their birthday, their wife's name, what committee they want to be on, what other interests they may have within the work, so that we're able to call on them to engage them, whether it's not just a subcommittee, but to make sure they have a voice and that they're showing up with the work, so that we understand what their interest is. So the orientation doesn't stop, if you will, when you bring them in, but you're making sure that you're keeping them informed, keeping them engaged, and also being quiet to listen to what they have interest in or what they want to do, and finding unique ways to have them engaged in the work. I love a board action plan.
I might add to Danella's very helpful comments that many of my organizations use a board self-assessment, and we do it at the end of each year. And among the questions are there areas of the board engagement where you would like to be more active? We really draw out the reflections and perspectives of the individual members on it's not a be all and end all, but annual tends to be a good mark in time. Enough has transpired, and sometimes you can really learn a tremendous amount about the perspective of various members and how you might make greater utilization of some of them.
We'll ask Suzanne to tee up another audience question, but I just want to, as a quick follow-up, endorse two of the things that everybody just said. One is following one's interests or passions when considering a board or an organization. I have seen that work for people time and time again. And I've seen people who are not following their passion, but they're following something else that's often a recipe for failure. And then to Charmaine's point about volunteering and getting involved, one of the great things about that is these are two-way streets. One doesn't get picked for a board just because one shows up and says, hi, I'd like to join your board. And frankly, it's going to work out the best if the two parties get to know each other. You get to know the organization gets to know you, whether it's in a volunteer capacity, whether it's in a donor capacity. Because if that relationship starts and it takes root, then it can grow, and then you have a really terrific connection and a terrific foundation that leads to a lot of success for the board member and for the organization over time. Suzanne.
Jim, wait, I just have to piggyback on what you said, which just leans into what Sonia just said, because as women of color, we're getting this. Oftentimes, it's not what you're saying, especially for people of color. A lot of times we're being asked to join boards, just to make sure, right? If you're going
Yep.
for a grant now, a lot of times people say, you know, what's the diverse makeup of your board? They don't even know you. I'll tell you, I joined a board 2 years ago, my daughter's alma mater, Fontbonne Academy. And I wasn't going to join because they still have nuns and white and no diversity. But my daughter said to me, who's the first in our family to have 3 degrees, she said, "Mommy, will you please do it? Because Maureen Gemma, who was instrumental in my daughter's life, is currently the board chair." And I said, "Okay, I'll join. I'll be the first, but I'm not going to be the last." So I will say there are a lot of boards now that are just looking for racial diversity that kind of don't really know you. I get these calls all the time now. "Can you just come on the board?" And I'm like, I don't even know you. I don't even know your organization or what you're about. So there are people that are just out there, nonprofits, looking for people to join, which, to Sonia's point, they just want you to sit there or to meet a quota for a grant. And so I think we have to really be astute and careful and make sure, as Sonia said, we're not being talked at or decked, that we're really there to add value. And I would say for those of us that are inviting people, to make sure there is a real commitment to the mission, that you're not just putting somebody on either for their racial background or even for their money. You know, some of the toughest board members I've had to deal with over my career are those who've put up big money. And I am a firm believer that I don't care about your money, your title, or your degrees. It's really about how you treat people and how you conduct yourself relative to the work.
I would
Thank
just
you very
add-
much. There's a lot of nodding in agreement. T.
I just add 2 quick things. One, it's, believe it or not, it's not just if you're a person of color, but I've spent a lot of years as the token female in a number of boards, even in the nonprofit world, where the board building has been driven by donor. There's been a number of questions in the chat, Jim, around how should you set your thresholds? And I wanted to weave into this.
Sure.
I think it's so important that you try and set your minimum donation thresholds at a level where you can include and draw in the most powerful, knowledgeable array of board members possible. And you find ways to not structure your board around the size of the donation. And you especially, and we've referenced it a number of times, you don't necessarily make the largest donor the board chair. So I think it's a difficult dynamic in many ways. But if you really want a well-functioning organization and a well-functioning board, you look for drawing in talent and commitment first. You establish thresholds that are workable, and you look to augment that with larger donor bases that don't necessarily sit at the helm of your organization.
Sure. Thank you, Charmaine. You want to add anything?
You're sounding fuzzy again, Jim. Maybe I am too. Am I
It's on
sounding
me. It's on
okay?
me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There is a problem there.
Am I okay? Do y'all hear me?
Now you're
okay?
good.
Okay,
You're
good.
good.
I wanted to go answer a question that someone posed regarding if the chairperson is a problem. In that instance, I would utilize the support and help of the executive committee. And so if that means speaking to your vice chair, your clerk, just that full executive committee, because that does happen where, like, the chairperson is just, as the young people would say, just wilding out. And I think what's important to remember is that the board as a body, like, it's not just one person. And so if one person is acting inappropriately, overstepping his or her bounds, then it's really the responsibility of the executive director to utilize the other members of the board to course correct, to if necessary, move that chairperson to an advisory role. But that's why I go back in my statement earlier where I said we have to be courageous, because again, we are doing the work, this mission work, and we need everyone rowing in the same direction. And so I hope that, I don't know, I can't remember who raised that question, but utilize the help and support of your the rest of your executive committee.
Thank you. Suzanne has a question from the chat that came up a little while ago.
Yes, this is Anne Moritz, who's been very patiently waiting. She actually quoted a sentence from our homework assignment, that responsibility for the purpose, direction, and mission is the board's, no one else's. And she's curious to know how the EDs feel about this thinking. And Anne, I welcome any further clarification you might want to provide.
I realize, this is Anne, that there's a tremendous amount of collaboration that has to go on that sometimes is undefined and sometimes is totally absent. I feel that's the case in this particular wisdom from the homework assignment. I'm just curious how it resonates with you and where you feel it leaves an ED in trying to support that same philosophy.
Charmaine, you want to take it?
I'm thinking, Danella, why don't you start, and you can tap me in, and then I'll tap T in.
Tell me, Anne, a little more when you say the same philosophy. Tell me.
I'm reflecting on the feeling I had when I first saw that statement, that the mission and the vision and the goals are solely the board's responsibility. I don't think so. So maybe we're in a place to differ with this advice in the homework. That's okay too. It just struck me, and I'm wondering how it struck you.
Well, I totally differ. I think the mission is a collective mission. It's, we all got together. And that helps me, in fact, almost on everything. Wednesday, when we have our board meeting, I repeat the mission because I think it's important for everybody on the team to understand what the mission is so that they don't get off course. And then I think the vision, I think all of it, the mission and the vision and the goals are a collaborative between the executive and the board. But I think that oftentimes the person who is closest to the work, which is the executive, closest to the need, closest to, again, board members are just, I hate to keep putting it this way. I'm one too. We're volunteers. We're probably on multiple boards. I can't begin to know everything that Fontbonne needs or that the full Commonwealth needs for all its women. So I rely on the executives in both those organizations to help to shape the vision, to give something to react to. So I do not believe that the board solely sets the mission, the vision, or the goals. I'll even say, and David's on, hopefully he'll approve it this week, but every year I set my own presidential goals with my staff in partnership with the board chair, and we come up with whatever those 5 or 7 goals are. The board chair kinds of approves them, tells me if there's 1 or 2 that he'd like to see in my performance. And then at the end of the fiscal year, we present it to the board at the first board meeting and bring it back. But a lot of that work is set by me and the staff. Yes, in partnership, but it's kind of I would say a lot of it is a tell, it's in an approve, it's not a them setting it. So I disagree. Long-winded way of saying I disagree.
Yeah,
It's either a
thank you.
collective or driven, to me, by the person who's leading the day-to-day operations.
I felt the dissonance too. Thank you.
I totally agree with Danella. I mean, when just pragmatically, most executive directors, their tenure outlasts that of a board member. And so if the board is the one who are holding the mission, the vision, the goals, then, you have term limits. And so after 6 years, you get another crop of folks. And so for the sake of consistency, that really needs to be held by the not solely, but certainly primarily by the executive director, the staff, in collaboration with the board as a collective. But no, that's, I would say that doesn't resonate with me at all. I would disagree completely.
And Ann, I just have to say really quickly that when I took the job that I'm in now, one of the first people I went to meet with, because I thought the board that I inherited was a little in disarray. And one of the challenges when you have board members wanting to set vision and mission and goals, they've probably been there too long and they're probably not operating in term limits. So one of the first people I went to meet with was the great Charmaine Higgins, because she's chairing the Boston Latin School Board, which was closest to our board, the fundraising arm of their side. And one of the first things she told me was about these term limits. And so we worked to institute that in our board, people only have a 2-3 year term, six years, because you can't really have the kind of change and effect that you want if people are around for 10, 15, 20, in some cases, 24 years. It's just too long to get anything done.
Yeah, all terrific comments. I think the only other thing I'd add is the mission and the strategy and the goals are definitely a combined effort of the staff and the board. And you don't want to make radical change precipitously. You don't want to engage in mission creep, but periodically it's very worthwhile to step back and evaluate both in terms of the needs of the constituencies you're serving and what you think will be best in building the future of the organization. I can give you one very concrete example. For decades at the Museum of Science, where I serve as a trustee and chair some committees, we have largely been seen as an institution for elementary and secondary school kids and their families. We've also been seen as a place, or to some extent in engineering as elemental and STEM education and so forth. We've had a pretty influential role, but again, grade 12 and lower. And many of the things that the museum wants to engage in, public forums around COVID, they have a new exhibit, Project Vaccine. This isn't just for the 12th grade and under. And we worked very diligently under the stewardship of a new chief executive to develop a new mission statement. Shorter is better, right? One that people can remember. And what we came up with is to inspire a lifelong love of science in everyone, period. That's it.
That's great. We are approaching, not quite there yet, but approaching the end of our time. Let me ask each of the panelists, we'll go around one more time. Any final thoughts, insights, reactions that you want to share with everybody at the end of what has been a terrific conversation? Danella.
No, I would just say clarity of roles is really important, and people staying in their lanes. I love what T said. I wrote down all of these pearls: nose in, fingers out, cards on the table, face up. And T, I just have to match you with the cards on the table, face up. I have a saying that I say, put your cards on the table and I'll tell you if I want to play. Love it.
So in the prep session for this call, one of the other expressions that Danella shared was, it's not the work, it's the people, which we could spend another hour and a half on. So there's a future Boston Club panel topic. Danella, thank you. Charmaine.
Thank you, everyone, for just this wonderful conversation. And I've also gleaned several pearls that I'll take back with me. The one expression that I used during our pre-session was a porous wall between your board and the management team. It's a wall. There is some, it's porous, but it's still a wall. And so to keep that in mind as you engage in all of this really important work for all of our organizations and the people we serve.
Charmaine, thank you. I was going to mention that, and I'm so glad you did, because you framed it better than any of us could have. T.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would remind you all about is, yes, it can be tough work and time consuming, but the rewards of serving as a nonprofit board member can be tremendous. And very honestly, I've been in some situations where at the end of my first term, 2 or 3 years, it was a drain. It really was not a two-way street. That was not going to be the best use of my time or the best way to fill the seat of that organization. So you don't want to do that precipitously, but I would encourage you to get engaged, look for things where you can really give, but you'll also get back.
That's a fantastic way to wrap up. We see it, we hear it all the time. There are so many people who do this work from so many perspectives, board perspectives, staff perspectives, supporter perspectives. And at the end, it's all about missions, and mission-driven work with all its ups and downs can be deeply satisfying, and more importantly, can accomplish a lot for the people you serve. So thank you to all the panelists from here. And I think Asa, am I handing it back to you?
Yes, thank you. Wow. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you, Jim, for leading it so skillfully. And thank you, Danella, Charmaine, and T, for sharing your wisdom, your stories, experiences. It's been absolutely fantastic to learn from you all. I'm sure everyone on this call agrees. Again, thank you for everyone who joined, and for everyone who organized this event. Also to Marlene, who has been our Zoom manager, our staff person at the Boston Club. Thank you for always being there for us. 2 events I want you to keep in mind. Stay tuned, because the Nonprofit Board Committee will be offering the last and 4th event in this particular session. More to come, but it will be in the beginning of the new year, where we will be highlighting some wonderful nonprofits who are seeking board members and who will have some time to highlight their organizations and pitch for them. And hopefully all of you can also refer people to that event who are looking for board service. I think we're doing a huge good by finding really good, diverse, skillful board members for the nonprofits that are doing such amazing and sometimes very hard work. And that's coming up on the Boston Club. And the other thing I really would love for you all to join is on November 5th in the morning, we have our annual corporate salute event, which will be really a wonderful event. We have Indra, and I'm forgetting her last name, of course, Noyi. Yes, Indra Noyi, who's the former chairwoman and CEO of Pepsi Cola, and to hear about her life and career and advice. I think it's something not to miss. So on our website, you can sign up for that event for November 5th. So again, with that, this has been really, really helpful to understand one of the trickiest challenges of leading nonprofits, this partnership between executives and board members. And you really helped us to give us some perfect advice and thoughts to think about in the future. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Night.
Thanks, Boston Club. Thanks, Jim.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Go Sox.
Take care.